All right, we'll return to the open meeting today, and we'll start with public comments for agenda items. No public comments today. Thank you. Item 6 will be stricken from the agenda today. There was no action necessary there. Item 7, proposed legislation and Lovejoy scholars. Mr. Willman.
I've turned the green light on now. Good morning, board. We are going to start with proposed legislation and Lovejoy scholars, and Thomas will be helping me up here. First of all, I just wanted to talk with you a little bit as why does the Texas 88th legislative session matter to Lovejoy? It's very, very important this year. We know that our legislature meets every 2 years for a 140-day session. That last day is May 29th, so it's coming up in a couple of weeks. And of course, over 1,000 plus educational bills have already been filed this session. The bills are filed with only a handful, of course, of them making their way through the process to become law. And the only bill required to come out of this session is the biennial budget, which includes the state funding for public education. So it's an extremely important time for us and for our Lovejoy Scholar program. Fortunately, we have a lot of resources available for those to assist with those that are following the Texas legislature. You can read and track bills. There's a Texas Legislative Online that if you want to view, you can go to our Lovejoy ISD website. There's some following links there. Talks about Texas Legislative Online, the House of Representatives, and of course the Senate there. All that information is on our website. We have been following all of these, and we have been focused on our legislative priorities. And then we also have encouraged our community to contact information for our state legislators and the Texas House and State Education Committee members. And fortunately, we also have a subcommittee here that's part of the board to provide information for us. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to let Thomas come up, and he's going to kind of talk to you a little bit about the budget implications, and then we will move on from there.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning, President Owens and Board of Trustees and Superintendent Cordell. So for the rest of this presentation, we're going to be really focusing on 3 bills that do impact our Lovejoy Scholars Program and our ability to charge tuition. So right now, Senate Bill 418, House Bill 4148, and Senate Bill 8, all 3 of these bills would eliminate a district's ability to charge tuition. And then 2 out of the 3 would mandate district transfers, whether inter or intra-district transfer based on capacity, and then acceptance by a lottery based off a priority of categories. So why are we able to charge tuition for out-of-district transfers? It's stated in current statute, section 25.038, that a receiving school district may charge a tuition fee to the extent that the district's actual expenditure per student in average daily attendance, as determined by its board, does not exceed the benefit that we would receive in state aid sources. So as we're thinking about the reviewing the data on the numbers, I'm going to represent this in the lens of state statute. So all these numbers are based off of the per unit as far as the per student average daily attendance. So when we look at our budget, we're assuming our budget stays constant in all 3 scenarios. So we'll go through and look at just residents only without any Lovejoy scholars. And then we'll look at the next 2 scenarios where it's Lovejoy scholars with and without the tuition charge. So when we look at, and this only reflects the M&O side of the house and not the INS. So when we look at residents only, what we're anticipating for next year's budget is that we can see here on the right side, on the expense side, our expenses are roughly $11,861 per student. Where on the revenue side, we can see the local share, the Lovejoy ISD taxpayers make up about 85.8% of the funding towards the expenses. You can see we will operate under a deficit budget in this scenario, which will have to leverage fund balance to help support that. And you can see the state aid only represents about 7.1% of our overall expenditures at $846 per student. So then when we look at the residents plus the scholars, so we know that the scholars will build efficiencies. So we should anticipate that our cost per student goes down, because we're not increasing our costs from a total perspective. There's very small variable costs, but our variable costs are more in chunks of students rather than per student. So for instance, when we think about adding a teacher, we typically would need 20 more students in a grade level to be able to add a teacher. Where our Lovejoy scholars are spread out across our 18 grades, we're not needing to add teachers or add costs by adding the students. They're just filling the gaps to be more efficient and increase our classroom efficiencies. So we see here with our tuition, it does go down to $10,864 from the $11,000 previously mentioned, which the Lovejoy ISD taxpayers directly fund about 88.7%, and our scholars only, the tuition will only amount to about 2.3%. So you can see here, I'm sorry, I'm gonna go ahead and go to the next one. Without the tuition, the costs are all the same. The local portion, the tuition would be considered local, so that would be the only reduction from the as far as the per unit basis as tied to the tuition. So when we look at this, we can see that we have a cost of $10,864, and the state aid is only $857. So per statute, the state aid portion, we can't charge tuition to exceed the state aid benefit. So in this scenario, we could charge up to $10,000, which is the total cost of operating expenses plus recapture, less the state aid of $857. When we begin the budget process and we're looking at just residents only, we can charge up to about $11,000 in tuition based off of the $11,186 minus the $846. So even when we look at the statute and the way it states, and we change it from a total overall students per student cost and just look at what's the benefit from a Lovejoy scholar, the 221 that we're anticipating, the increase in state aid on a per scholar basis is only $1,100. So even in that scenario, we could still charge up to $9,700. So we have a range from $9,700 to $11,000 in tuition that we can charge based off of state statute and how we can interpret the state statute. So we hear a lot of questions as far as, well, don't the Lovejoy scholars generate state aid through the basic allotment? The answer to that is yes, it does, but it's very minimal. So when we run it through the formula for each additional student that we add, it only represents $11 per student. The increased benefit across all of our students, but again, it's $1,100 per scholar that we add to the program. Where we see the most benefit is in the reduction of recapture. So more of our local dollars is going to stay with us, and we're not seeing any additional revenue because the tax collection is the tax collection, and the state aid only goes up by a little bit. So just overall key takeaways. Under current statute, we can charge up to $11,000 in tuition. As I mentioned, we anticipate as we add more scholars, we become more efficient, so that number will go down. But even in our current budget, anticipated budget for next year, that range is still within our current $9,000 that we charge because we're able to charge up to $10,000. Again, even this does not even include the INS side. So if we include the INS and the cost per student on the INS side, that's an additional $5,000 per student on the INS side. Okay. I'm going to hand it back over to Anna to go through potential challenges.
Of course, go ahead. Yeah.
So we're following state statute for their methodology, which I believe does not allow us to include INS.
It doesn't clearly state that we can't include INS. It says the approved budget through the board. So we do approve the INS budget annually. So we could potentially, but we wanted to show at least at a minimum. Yeah, we can make an argument. Exactly.
So if they flip that argument and say, well, you're keeping more of your tax dollars
Yes, sir.
It's just money we would send back to the state.
Exactly. And even in that situation, if they added that in and you add up that benefit plus the state aid benefit, and then we add in INS, we're still within our, the $9,000 range. So I did the math on that. It's about $6,000 to $7,000 benefit on the INS, on the, sorry, the recapture side, plus the 1,000, and then it kind of, you add in the INS. Yep.
I think if they were to argue, just say something
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I can do that.
Okay, and of course, there is that, some of the challenges that we're going to face is that loss of tuition revenue. Of course, this past year, I think we were right at $1 million just in the tuition collection. Also, as we are looking at staffing, our challenges in projecting district and campus enrollment is very difficult right now. We're not sure how many students we're going to have, that type of thing. Something else that was brought to our attention was UIL eligibility and reclassification. Basically, the way that this legislation has been brought forward is it's open enrollment across the state. So any student from anywhere could enroll in our schools for sports or athletics or anything. And that is going to create some challenges with UIL, we think. So that's also a concern. Of course, from me and our HR departments, recruiting of staff, especially in those hard to fill areas to support students. Those world languages, special education, we already have difficulty finding staff for those, but potentially we could have more students with needs and we want to meet their needs. And then hiring of those certified educators to provide appropriate services for students. And I'm talking about, you're talking about your supported services, special education services, LSSPs, diagnosticians, all those types of things, because if we have more students with needs, then we need to address those, and they will have need testing and assessment. So from the assessment department, special education assessment department, that also is challenging right now. We're also possibly looking at increased teacher to student ratios, and we're saying that because it sounds like this open enrollment is year round. So anyone that comes, we could possibly adding students year round and increasing teacher to student ratios. Some other challenges we're looking at is updating the master schedule throughout the school year, so it could create schedule changes every 9 weeks for teachers and students. Because at the elementary level, we're going to have to redistribute, because if we have a 22-to-1 K through 4 and we go over that, we either ask for a waiver or we have to add a teacher and redistribute kiddos, because we don't want one class at 24 and then one at, and then take 2 kids away and start another class at 3 or 4. So that's also another process that can be very challenging. I've done that before, and that's not easy. Once, they could be half a year in and we have students that have come and we have determined that we need to add another teacher and redistribute students there. Also, some of the other things that, as far as challenges, additional time out of the classroom for teachers and staff to attend those 504 meetings, ARDs, those types of things. Instruction is very important, and we want students engaged and we want them with their classroom teachers as much as possible. And then additional responsibilities and time demands on administrators, counselors, and all those support staff, because we know that we have an expectation, we have a legacy of excellence here. We want that for every child. However, that's going to put demands on everyone there. Questions for Thomas or I?
I know with today's Scholar program that
Yes,
that's
ma'am.
a decision that we make as a district to have that program and its criteria. So for clarification, this piece of legislation would take that away from a district decision.
Correct.
And would require us to have this program and to follow
A lottery system.
Okay. So
And
it
in
would-
the order that they have determined. I noticed that they have moved teachers up to the top, and then there's a certain order that they've determined that we would take students depending on what our capacity is. Yes,
So in another way, this is somewhat of a loss of local control
yes,
over our
Exactly.
current district programs.
yeah, exactly.
Senate Bill 418 and House Bill 4148 would require that Lovejoy ISD and all other public school districts accept transfers up to capacity, and then give that priority list in lottery by which the students can be accepted. So it does remove that local control. It also removes what is currently in place with section 25.038, where that gives our district a mechanism to prevent the subsidizing of the educational costs of students that reside out of our district boundaries.
So generally speaking, in layman's terms, they're taking our tax dollars and they're basically signing a blank check for transfers that our taxpayers are going to fund, transfers from outside our district who don't pay our school taxes.
Correct.
To come in and be educated in Lovejoy ISD. Simplest form. I.e., we don't pay it back in recapture, but to the extent we have recapture. At some point, we may or may not have recapture, and then that's when it really becomes a problem, because state aid is whatever it was,
Minimum.
some small number,
Minimum.
less than $1,000 a kid.
Right, correct.
And one other item to mention on the INS side. So I kind of understand why you took a conservative approach, because we don't have to build a new building or anything like that. But we've made some changes recently with our technology inventory, where we have purchased new Chromebooks and other things to support our students' learning. And so that type of cost that the district has paid and has been paid by our taxpayers would subsidize transfer students, because they would not be paying that INS portion. Just want to confirm.
That is absolutely correct. So one very specific example would be our one-to-one initiative that we'll be rolling out, where you all approved the use of INS funds for Chromebook laptops for each of our students, and each of our students enrolled in the district would require that, and that is on the INS side, as are the significant amount of instructional resources that you approved to support each of our students.
So the unintended consequences around the INS piece is substantial, not only around Chromebooks and things like that, but also the maintenance and upkeep of these buildings. These buildings just don't sit here, obviously. And we know we have some deferred maintenance through these capital planning processes and these assessments of our facilities. We're going to need to spend some money to update these facilities and maintain them to keep them in their current condition. So it discounts all of that to zero, which ultimately is a negative.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for the update. So a good segue into our next piece, which would be our legislative subcommittee update.
Thank you, Board. Our legislative subcommittee, as you'll recall, has been giving an update at our regularly scheduled board meetings. Just given the timing of the legislative session and some of two pieces of legislation that are particularly concerning to us, we'd like to offer some additional update to you during this workshop. So we have a little bit of a scaled down presentation for you. And so thank you for the excellent setup for Thomas and Anna. We had a similar evaluation of the current pieces of legislation and what was concerning for us. And so the first I'd like to call out for discussion is Senate Bill 418. And as mentioned in the prior presentation, this language actually has been inserted in other bills, House Bill 4148 and Senate Bill 8. And I believe we've covered, but this does mandate a transfer program for all public school districts. It does prohibit us charging tuition, which allows us to recap the difference between what we receive from the state and what we actually pay to educate a Lovejoy student. And it does mandate who we accept and the order in which we accept. This bill was authored by our own representative here. Angela Paxton did author this bill. It did pass the Senate Ed and the full Senate. It now sits within the House, where our representative Candy Noble will have the opportunity to vote on this legislation. I believe, again, the team has done a good job covering some of our concerns, the most significant of which is the loss of $1 million of tuition. And I think Thomas pointed out well that that would require use of fund balance with our current budget structure and set of programs, which would require us to evaluate if that's something that we would choose to do in our budget process. It does inject quite a lot of uncertainty into the administration's ability to project our enrollment, that which also impacts our budget, the ability to hire in all of our student programming. We are concerned about teacher to student ratios, UIL impact, and also redistribution of students through master schedule changes. So the action that would be needed is that we would be able to communicate that passage of this bill in its current form will negatively impact Lovejoy ISD based on those bullets above. And one thing to call out in particular is that this similar language from 418 may be and has already been inserted into other bills. So it may be somewhat of a moving target. This slide's a little better. So House Bill 100, this is a funding related bill for public education. It does increase the basic allotment by $90 next year, and then an additional increase in 2025. It does mandate that we use 50% of that increase for compensation, which we would do anyway. It adds an inflation adjustment to the basic allotment, which is a very positive thing. So today we have to wait for the legislature to pass a change in the basic allotment. This will allow there to be an automatic increase, particularly in an inflationary environment. It moves to enrollment-based funding, but only for certain allotments, not for the larger student base. It also provides some additional funding for both regular and special education transportation. This bill was introduced in March. It did pass the full House. It now sits in the Senate Education Committee. One item of note is in the House, before it passed at the $90 increase, there was an amendment offered on the floor that would have increased that $90 to $500. Unfortunately, that amendment did not pass, and that's why it's still down at the $90 today. Our representative, Candy Noble, voted against that amendment. Now that this bill is in the Senate Ed Committee, our representative, Angela Paxton, will have an opportunity to vote on this item. So this does have a positive impact to Lovejoy ISD. It does increase funding per student. That will allow us to utilize that for compensation and other student programming. It does have an annual inflation adjustment, and it does increase our transportation funding, which is also positive. Of course, we would certainly love an increase greater than $90, which is really what we will need to be appropriately funded as a district. And just for your ease of reference, we have included, once again, 2 slides, this one and the next one, which are our own representatives' contact information and also members of the House and Senate Education Committees, in case our community would like to reach out.
So just to kind of summarize, in terms of what people can be doing now, with 418 pending before the House Public Education Committee, I would ask you to reach out and contact members on this slide in the House Education Committee. And then with respect to HB 100, do the same, either voicing support for it or saying, we support it, but you could be doing a lot more and you should be doing a lot more in terms of per student funding, to the Senate Ed Committee. Basically with the funding bill, I think everybody, including these people who are writing these laws in Austin, agree that we've been dealing with double-digit inflation since 2019, or at least we've gotten to that point. I've seen as high as 17% inflation in terms of school-based and student-based expenditures, and they're offering us a 1.4% increase in flexible spending in the basic allotment. Now, I know they've earmarked spending in other areas, but they're just not doing enough, and it's disheartening that our representatives are not doing enough for public education, and if you want to tell them that, that'd be appropriate.
One last thing, Jeff. A couple of people we've talked about how emails are great, phone calls are better. People have sometimes had the comment or question, well, I would make a phone call, but I'm not sure what I would say, and I don't feel comfortable. I don't want to get put into an uncomfortable situation. We're available. If you want to reach out to Jeff or Julie or myself, or even, I think, I don't want to speak for the administration, but we can talk you through that. We can help you with These slides are good. I would start there. If you want to look at our priorities that we have on the website, that's there. We can boil it down into quick, easy couple of bullet points to make it an easy phone call and conversation. So don't hesitate to reach out to us if you want help.
Yeah, contact any board member, really, so. All right, thank you for that update. Item 9, is a presentation on bus camera.
Good morning. I just wanted to share with you some information that we've identified as a need throughout our, or not throughout our district, but in our transportation department, really. And wanted to give you some of the findings that we've found and potentially a solution to those. So just to give you some background, right now, our current fleet of buses, we have, I say this with a smile on my face because Kyle's coming from a place that has 500 buses. We have 27 buses in our general education fleet. We have 7 buses in our special education fleet. Currently, from those buses, we run 3 special education routes. And on each one of those routes, we have a driver who does not necessarily have to be CDL certified. They do have to go through a Region 10 training, but you don't have to be CDL certified on the special education buses. And we have 1 aide on each one of those buses. And then our general education routes, we have 1 bus driver on the 1 CDL certified bus driver on the gen ed routes, and on each of those gen ed routes, and then we have a CDL certified bus driver on each of the shuttle routes. The shuttle routes, of course, are for our staff. They take our staff students from campus to campus at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day as well. So that's to give you just some background knowledge as far as what our transportation fleet is made up of, both inventory wise with buses and personnel wise as well. What we really do and we communicate with our administration is and our bus drivers too, is our buses are really an extension of our classrooms and of our campuses. Right now, as you know, we have sufficient camera coverage on our campuses. Right now, we do not have any bus cameras, and that poses a bit of a concern. One, we're one of the few districts that don't have cameras on our buses at this point, but we do have cameras installed on our special education buses. Those are a little bit different. They are removable hard drives, and so it's a great picture. It's a great the video footage is great, but it does take a little bit of legwork. If you do need to pull the camera's footage from those, you have to pull the hard drive out, go plug it into your desktop, download, and then go take your hard drive back and install it back onto the bus. On those special education buses. So we do utilize the footage from those from time to time, but currently, like I said, we have no cameras installed on any of our general education buses. And so the need for those bus cameras really are these three items. We want to positively contribute to a safe and orderly environment on our school buses. When you put 60 to 70 kids on a bus, it doesn't matter if it's a shuttle bus just for a few minutes or a 30-minute route or 45-minute route, you're going to get kids who, do kid stuff. And so we would like to have video surveillance of that on our buses. We want to try to decrease student misbehavior. As great of the kids as we have here in Lovejoy, they're kids. And kids are going to be kids from time to time. We also want to assist administrators with any investigations into safety concerns and behavior incidents that happen on the buses. So it's, again, it being an extension of our classrooms, extension of our campuses, this would give our administrators an eyes onto and ears too, because they provide audio onto what is happening on the bus. As you can imagine, we task our bus drivers with a lot at the beginning of each day. Their sole purpose is to safely get students from point A to point B. And in order to do that, their eyes need to be on the road as much as possible. They obviously have a mirror up above them that they can see, but when they look into that mirror, their eyes are off the bus. And so anytime we can assist them with that, we want to make sure we take advantage of that. So we've looked into some vendors and some just different quality of cameras. Here's an example of what one of our vendors would provide for us. And there's a couple of options, and I'll go through those here in just a second. The first option is providing 4 cameras on a bus. So the photograph on the left-hand side would be the photograph of one camera. We would have 4 of those on each bus. Potentially, that would be one option. And then the other option would be adding a 5th camera, which would give you a dashboard cam, basically, to have a driver's view from the driver's seat onto the road. So we would be able to see what the driver is seeing. These are not live cameras, so we can't go on and snoop, if you will, but they are Wi-Fi based cameras. So when they come back into the bus barn, they start downloading the video footage through our Wi-Fi. And so, as you can see, the technology gives us a great view of cameras. It's aisle by aisle, so we don't have a camera at the front of the bus just looking through the back, and we don't have any video footage. It gives us really good coverage of the entire bus. And so the options for the buses, bus cameras, if we were to move forward with a project such as this, our first option again would be to have 4 cameras plus 1 windshield camera for a total of 5 cameras, which would equal about $92,400. Option 2 would be just the 4 360-degree cameras. So you would mount those in the middle of the ceiling, and it would give you a 360-degree view. That one camera, and you would have 4 of those cameras installed. It would be a total of $86,800. Again, those are just for the general education buses because we don't need them on the special ed buses. All we would need to do would be to install Wi-Fi bridges on the special education buses to convert those over to Wi-Fi as opposed to the removable hard drives. And then what is required on each of the buses, regardless if you go with option 1 or option 2, would be the Wi-Fi bridges on all the buses plus the antenna kits. So we would have reception once they pulled back into the bus barn for our access points to download the video footage. So you can see what the total costs are for each of those options. Finally, visited with Thomas Wellman and just some options on how we could potentially fund a project such as this. And because of some interest that we've gained from some of the monies that we've had in the district, also with the savings from projects that came in as us not needing to spend as much as we initially thought. There were some savings on those bond projects. We have approximately $344,000 that we'd be able to put, that we'd already allocated for another project, that we would be able to use towards this project as well. So, and you can see the breakdown of where that $344,000 came. Any questions?
Would the sped buses be upgraded to a non-hard drive option?
Yes. So yes, we would put a Wi-Fi bridge in each one of those, install it with a antenna, and that is a part of that $24,250.
Are these new options, are they much more durable than the hard drive option? Like, what are they based on? Flashcards?
Yes, they are. They're extremely durable. If you go and look at the cameras, even right now on our special education buses, they're really flush. So the kids they're very durable. Yeah. I don't want to get into the details of it, but they're flush with the ceiling. So they're very durable.
I have this vision of a kid riding down the bus and going, bop,
No,
bop.
it's not like if you go and look on our campuses right now, it's a bubble. The camera is. It's not a bubble. Like I said, it's if you run your hand across it, across the ceiling, you would barely even know that you're touching a camera.
Also, just a comment, I like option 1. Doesn't seem like there's much difference in cost. And I feel that whatever the driver is seeing, in case activity is happening in the back of the bus, if there's a sudden stop or something along those lines, we want to know why. So I felt like option 1 made a lot of sense for a small difference in cost.
I agree, and really with the state of things these days and not knowing who could approach a bus, just the safety and security of having digital eyes outside of the bus as opposed to just inside the bus would give us another layer of security if just for our bus drivers and their safety and the students.
The ability to attract and retain bus drivers also would be improved by this
Without a
substantially. So
doubt.
I like all of those.
Well, right now, if we have an incident on the bus, it's really because their eyes are on the road. They're going off of having to visit. We're having to go off of having to visit with a student and get the student's account of it. Sometimes that's accurate. Sometimes it's not.
Do these have an expected life expectancy on the
They have
warranties maybe?
They have warranties. They have a 3-year parts and labor warranty, and then a parts warranty of I think 6 or 7 years.
And how old are the current cameras that we're going to be keeping on the other buses? Do we know that?
On the special education buses, they're They are the same cameras that we are purchasing here. I'm not exactly sure when those were installed, but they're the exact same cameras that we're purchasing. You bet.
Item 10 is a presentation on special education.
Good morning. Just wanted to revisit some of the work that we started actually last fall of 2021 on special education staffing and programming. As you recall, we had a consultant come in and conduct a needs assessment of our program and models, and also looking at staffing. And as a result of that and the feedback we received, we formed a special education teacher staff task force. And we also began working with our campus principals on coordination of master scheduling, wanting to ensure that before we were getting too deep into the scheduling, we were putting students who required some more creative scheduling for services at the forefront. We also identified in that report that there were significant gaps on capacity of not just special education, but general education staff as well. So some work was started with some excellent professional development that we started back in the spring and have continued through this year. We added in fall of 2022 specially designed instructional coaches, which are coaches that specialized in the setting of special education setting, but also when we're serving students in the general education. So we've had 3 this year, and they've been out supporting our campuses and have gotten a lot of great feedback from our principals and teachers on having that additional support and expertise on the campuses. We also added 2 coordinators at the district level. And then last fall, we formed an advisory committee made up of parents and staff. Back in January, we did decide to re-engage with the consultant for further review and analysis of program and staffing. And this is just a quick overview of what came out in December 2021 of the report, and that again addressed staff capacity, looking at our staffing models, and then again focusing on master scheduling. So springing forward to this spring of 2023, the findings that were revealed is that we really discovered and know that our diagnosticians have some expertise that if we house them on the campuses, we really felt like that could help build capacity and build support of our teams on our campuses. And I'm saying teams, I'm referring to teachers, general education, and also with our administrators on the campuses. It doesn't really change the role of what they're doing. It's just having them on the campuses for staff to access. That was a recommendation. Then also, how can we build clarity with our collaborative structures of our special education and our general education staff as well. And then we also looked at case management numbers. We have had some pretty high numbers this year. Some of our challenges has been having to do with hiring special education staff, as Anna was and you've heard us throughout the year talking about what a challenge that is. So some other findings is that we looked at the paperwork that we were doing both in an assessment staff and also with general education and special education staff. So we looked at some ways that we could possibly reduce that workload for teachers and the assessment team. Also looking at referral and pre-referral processes on our campuses and how can we be more efficient and consistent across the district and what's occurring on the campuses. Continue need for professional learning for all stakeholders when it comes to programming, and looking at a need to have someone on the campus leadership team that is representing the departments on this team. So that would be like a department chair of special education, or just a lead like we do with grade level leads at the elementary and intermediate schools. And then also just continuing to refine that role of the specially designed instructional coach to maximize their expertise on the campuses. So what we are moving forward with on assessment and related services staff, we currently have two full-time and 1 part-time, and then we have some contracted services with diagnosticians. In order to provide the capacity and support we need on our campuses, we are recommending that we have 4 full-time diagnosticians and then 1 part-time. And with that part-time, we would also make that person a lead diagnostician, just to kind of be a voice and a representation for district leadership and the assessment team. Assigning all campuses where they would have a full-time or part-time diagnostician on the campus. And then looking at our assessments, we know coming up in 23-24, we're going to have a significantly high number of assessments just because of the response to the COVID year that we did not have kids in school. So we're anticipating that, and how can we address that? And that concern's been brought forth by the assessment team as well as campus administrators as well too. But we do feel like we can bring some contracted services in to assess with the assessment piece of that to address it. And then trying to minimize some of our part-time and our contracted services. These folks have been incredible and very supportive in the work that we're doing, but it does create some challenges sometimes with scheduling and having access to these experts on the campuses. In addition, you've heard us share that we had committed to adding an additional teacher position on all 5 of the campuses, 2 of the campuses this year, high school, and I believe it was Sloan. We've added those additional positions. We also are going to be increasing the stipend for the special education teachers. Currently, we're paying them $2,000, increasing that to $5,000, looking at how we can streamline paperwork requirements so that our teachers can focus on students. And then master scheduling changes will continue so that we can ensure collaboration is accessible for general education and special education teachers, and they can engage in professional learning. And then, as I alluded to there, each campus will have a special ed lead or department chair, and they'll receive a small stipend for that. In response to systems and processes, we are looking at our current system of how we manage our data and information. The program that we're using, could we possibly convert to a program that is more user-friendly with other programs that interface more naturally with that? So that is under review. We're also looking at our pre-referral and referral processes and procedures and streamlining that. And then to assist with some of the paperwork and the scheduling that can be extremely time-consuming for our case managers as well as our assessment staff, we are adding 2 clerical positions. One will be at the high school full-time just because of the number of students that we serve at the high school. We're going to be using the counseling assistant over at Willow to help support scheduling and paperwork and information sharing. And then we'll share the second one with the other 3 campuses. So we've shared this information we've gotten out on our campuses through our team huddles. We've met with special education teachers. We've met with the assessment staff to know what's forthcoming. In addition, we have scheduled some meet and greets with our new Director of Special Education, Allison Clonch. In fact, one of them is this evening. And it's really for parents to meet Mrs. Clonch and learn about what is forthcoming for the 23-24 school year. In addition, we really felt like it would be important for us just to have time to recalibrate, spend some concentrated time with campus administrators, special education teachers, and district staff. So we've set aside July 26th and 27th, which are non-contract days for our teachers, but we're asking them to come back if they're available to do some intensive planning and professional development so that we're ready to launch some of these new program models for the school year. And we have set aside compensation for staff that are not on contract those 2 days. So again, these dates have already been shared with our staff, and we're excited about what's forthcoming. So any questions? Thank you.
Item 11 is a capital planning update. Ms. Cordell?
Good morning. I'm excited to be here with a capital planning update. You will notice on your agenda, we have a capital planning update, and then the next item is going to be a capital planning process update. That's where we'll hand it over to the PBK expert, Danny Berger, but we wanted from a big picture perspective to let you all know what's going on with our capital planning committee. Our capital planning committee met on Thursday, May 4th last week. This is a stakeholder-based committee. We had about 30 parents and staff members there, community members there, to have conversations and start to dig in to where we're at in regard to our capital assets, our buildings, our major equipment and resources. And we wanted to have a conversation about what our current state is and then what we need to do in terms of planning forward to ensure that we have a strategic plan in that area in place. So our capital planning committee is an advisory stakeholder committee that you all approved back earlier this school year. We're looking at facilities, fleet, technology, furniture, our fixtures, equipment, and we are going to do a needs assessment process in partnership with PBK and then look at strategically balancing our identified capital needs with our financial decision making to make sure that we can continue our legacy of excellence here in Lovejoy. We also have a very clear committee charge. You will notice, you've seen this before, but you'll notice at the bottom that one of the results of this process is going to be a SWOT analysis. So we will be producing as a committee a list of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so that will be one of the products that you all can expect as we conclude this work. We are grounding this work, of course, in our mission and in our focus areas. You'll recall that these focus areas are something that I shared when I first came to the district. We talked about that in the summer of 2021. We identified legacy of excellence as a top priority. We know that Lovejoy ISD is uniquely special. We want to make decisions and take actions that align with that outcome. And then, of course, making sure our students are ready for their future, and then financial sustainability. We also had a conversation that capital planning is important because excellence is by design. It doesn't just happen. We have to have a plan in place and stakeholder voice at the table. Taking you back to the 21-22 school year, we have a foundation that was built by 100 of our stakeholders that were part of our Lovejoy 2030 Strategic Planning Committee. And if you'll recall, our Financial Sustainability Committee was one arm of our strategic planning process. And you'll see that up here. So we had a teaching and learning group, graduate profile, legacy of excellence, financial sustainability, operations, future ready, and then talent acquisition, retention, and support. A significant portion of the work that our Financial Sustainability Committee did and our operations group did, you'll see threaded through our capital planning process. And you'll see right here within our strategic plan, we have a focus on our facility space. And if you'll look at strategy 4.2.3, this did recommend that we form this capital improvement committee. Again, very focused on our why. We talked about how this has to be at the center of all our visioning, and our strategic planning is making sure that we are propelling each person, each of our students, each of our staff to that level of personal excellence. We also are grounded in our core values, knowing that sometimes there are difficult conversations, difficult decisions that need to be made when we're putting students at the center of our decision making, which we do each and every day. And then also focused on that continuous improvement. We want to be our absolute best today and making sure we build a better tomorrow for our students, our staff, and our community. And that we're one heart, one Lovejoy. And I think a committee like this very much represents that and represents us at our very best. I will tell you, anytime we have the opportunity to meet with our community and engage in this manner, it's very humbling for us as administrators to know that we have that many people, whether it be parents, community members, or employees, that are willing to sacrifice personal and professional time for our students and for our district. It really is incredible. we had Thomas take the committee through a baseline understanding of school finance and debt service. So he's going to come up and share that. We thought this was really important to make sure we were getting everybody off to a strong start and we had a common and unified baseline understanding.
Thank you, Katie. Good morning again. As Katie mentioned, on Thursday, we went over just a real high-level overview of school finance as it relates to the M&O and INS budget, and then also looked at the different funding sources and the allowable uses of those sources. So when we think about school district revenue, it's generated through three sources: local, state, and federal funding. And when we think about the different what are some examples of those three different sources? When we think of local funding, just think about it as funds that are generated through our local community, through property taxes, through fees such as transportation fees, or tuition such as Lovejoy Scholars, or donations from the Lovejoy Foundation, and then also direct student lunch payments from our students. And then our governmental funding, as far as the state is concerned, and federal. State, it could be two different types, which is through the state aid funding formula, or through state grants, such as the instructional materials allotment, safety and security grant that we received this year, and the dyslexia and autism grants. And then federal funding is more of a supplemental type funding, which we receive as IDEA-B, ESSA funds, which is Title I, Title II, and then also our National School Lunch Program. So when we think about federal funding, it is appropriated for special programs to provide services to specific groups of students. For instance, our IDEA-B funding is specifically tied to special education students. We cannot use federal funding to supplant what we're required to do through local and state dollars. And our federal dollars are a very small portion of our overall revenue source. In the current year, the 22-23, federal dollars represented 2.2%, but that will go down as we go forward because we received a lot of one-time funding through COVID relief, such as the child care funding and also the ESSER funding. The state funding, the primary source of state funding for school districts is the Foundation School Program, or FSP. That's administered by the TEA, and ensures that all school districts, regardless of property wealth, receive substantially equal access to similar revenue per student at similar tax effort. And this represents about a 6.6% in the current year of Lovejoy ISD's overall funding. And then a majority of our funding is through local funding, represents 91.2% in the current year, generated from property taxes and not sales taxes. And we also reviewed with the committee that each year a school district adopts two tax rates, which is the maintenance and operations and the interest and sinking. So when we think about the maintenance and operations, our local and state dollar fund a high majority of our maintenance and operation cost. So when we think about the maintenance and operations, it's more of our day-to-day cost, salaries for our teachers and our staff, facility repairs and maintenance, bus repairs, the fuel for the bus, the food services, school supplies and materials, and then our utilities. And then we try to kind of compare to what our own personal finance, our own personal costs, which would be like our car fuel, routine services, groceries, and cleaning supplies, and so forth. We did a lot of work with the Financial Sustainability Committee to really become more efficient on this side of the house, and implementing a lot of cost efficiencies. Now, as we move to the capital planning, we want to look and explore kind of on the interest and sinking side of things. And this is mainly for payment for our debt service that we pay for bonds that were approved over the course of the past, inception. And what this can pay for is mainly like new building construction or an existing building renovation. Think about the big ticket items that we can use bond funds have more than a year of useful life. We can't pay salaries, we can't pay for consumables, but we can pay for things such as computers, Chromebooks, technology, school buses, and then even program-specific equipment such as band instruments and athletic equipment from here. So we just did a little breakdown of what our current 22-23 budget looks like overall. So we can see kind of on the local side of things. Locally, we fund a large portion of our overall budget. Our current debt service for this year was about $18.3 million. We did approve to pay down roughly $3 million extra in principal to help save the district some interest expense going forward. So that is incorporated in here. And as we think about going forward, we'll be incorporating plans to further pay down more debt to create more capacity for future years.
As you are aware, you approved us to partner with PBK to do a capital needs assessment. And one thing that I have learned with working with PBK is they are very responsive. I've never had the opportunity to work with PBK before. They've got significant experience. You'll see here in the long range facility planning process, and that's one of the reasons we partnered with them. Another reason is that PBK has a significant history in Lovejoy ISD. And it was important to us as part of this process that we were able to access the resources they have available in terms of that historical knowledge in regard to our facilities. And they provided this timeline here. We discussed this with this committee as well, making sure that they knew historically what had gone on in regard to construction and renovation projects. We are looking at facility condition at this point in the process. We are going to take the committee on some tours as well when we get back together in the fall. We are closely monitoring enrollment and capacity, and that's something that actually PBK has helped us with before. They were responsible for that initial capacity analysis that was conducted in 2021. And then in regard to enrollment, we've been working very closely with the demographer to monitor those numbers and look at where we stand. The educational program is something where we are leaning on the expertise of our curriculum and instruction team, our principals, our teachers who are part of this process, as well as the input of all of our stakeholders that is seen in our Lovejoy 2030 strategic plan. I wanted to share with you in our community why we partnered with PBK, and that's because they have expertise beyond what we have here in the district. So you'll see here a list of the different areas, and Danny's going to go over this in greater detail. But we are so glad to have had architects, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, plumbers, to be able to walk all of our facilities and conduct this assessment process. You'll see here that they've walked 700,000 feet within Lovejoy ISD. They've had a meeting with each and every one of our principals. We have a weekly meeting with cabinet staff and then identified district leaders that have responsibilities in this area. And so I appreciate their communication and their responsiveness. In regard to the capital planning committee, you will see that we met last week. We're going to have another meeting this Thursday. We're going to take a break for the summer, and then we are going to kick off after school starts in August and have that first meeting in either August or early September, and then have a schedule of meetings throughout the school year. And then we will update you throughout that process, and then, of course, make sure you all have that product. Are there any questions for me at this time?
I think not. Item 12 now. Capital needs assessment process.
Right. I'm going to ask that Danny Berger come on up and assist us with this. What? Oh, come on, you're welcome to come on over here so that you have access to your presentation. That way you can click. I might need some assistance here. I think I put it in the wrong mode. I should be able to get up. I messed it up. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Cordell. Good morning, everybody, board president, members of the board. Like Katie said, I'm Danny Berger, principal with PBK Architects. I'm going to give a little update on our team, our process, and then some high-level findings so far, just kind of big picture items that we found at the campuses that we walked. So as you can see on the screen, we've got myself and then the partner in charge, Todd Spohr. He's been with PBK 20 plus years. Caroline's our director of facility planning. She's out of Houston, but she's been facilitating the process, and she's definitely an expert in this area. And then Amanda is our project manager. She's local, and this is all she does. So she's a great resource for us as well. So with that, just long-range facility planning process. So like Katie had mentioned, the facility condition assessment is kind of a component of the bigger picture. So we've got it broken down here on the screen into 3 different sections. You've got the plan and discover phase. That's already been, as far as getting the team together, setting milestones and schedules, that's happened. So we're in helping with the facilities condition assessment. So there's several steps that we have here listed, and we'll go into a little more detail on what all those entail and what we do on the next slide. And then that all of the information that we generate out of this, we look at it as a fact-finding mission. So we're just trying to find information and be as objective as possible. And that way, when the master planning process is going forward, you can use that as a resource to help guide and make decisions. So facilities condition assessment, by definition, is an assessment, is comprehensive systematic evaluation of existing conditions. So the only thing that we're looking at, we're walking in a building and we're looking at the existing conditions as they are today. That's what we're evaluating, and that's what we're trying to add a priority to as objective as possible. So we've got 4 steps listed down here: assess, prioritize, price, plan. So the assessment piece, that's where we walk, we gather information, and then we take that and we enter it into a database. So we've got thousands of items that we've, from all the disciplines that we have walking these buildings, and it's all in there. So then from that, we'll start assigning priorities to that based off of useful life. So for the most part, we're going to look at it. We've got 1s, which are like 1 to 2 years. We've got 2s that are going to be 3 to 5. And then you've got 3s that are beyond 5, and then 4s are kind of wish list way out there. And sometimes we use those to capture things that maybe aren't based off of a facility condition, but it's a comment or a discussion that was had with some of these interviews that we do. So we try to grab all that information, even if it's not something that we're going to prioritize, but that way we have it documented as a discussion piece for the district. So then the pricing component of this, we get with local contractors that we work with, multiple, and we get unit prices based on current market conditions. So we're not just throwing numbers at things. We try to be as accurate as we can with what the current market says these things cost. And with that, we look at inflation and soft costs, and we have that programmed into this. So if it's a priority 1, your inflation is going to be maybe, we're pricing it for next year. If it's a 2, it's going a couple years out, up to 5 years out, and then when you get to 3s and 4s, so those numbers, when we start doing that, we're not quite at that process yet. We're in just reviewing data now, but when you start looking at that, as you get to the 3s and 4s, the numbers start getting larger just because of inflation. And obviously, we don't know what that's going to do, but it's best guess based on current market and trends and what we see. So then the final phase is plan. So again, our piece is just to inform that planning process. We're here to help provide information as the district takes that information and then plans going forward. So as far as the data collection analysis, several steps that we do. So we send out questionnaires to each campus ahead of us walking. So before we step foot in the campus, we like to send out questionnaires to get information from principals and any other key personnel within that campus. We sit down with the maintenance department and other departments and do these assessment tabletop review meetings. So the purpose of that is to get feedback from the guys that know the buildings, or the people that are in the buildings all the time, get information from them. Do they know something that we may not be able to see? Is there a leak somewhere that we need to look at a little closer, or is there some other deficiency or opportunity that we can make sure that we get eyes on and document? And then also with that, we do principal interviews as well. So every campus, we interview the principal before we went out there, again, to get information. They're the ones that are in the building every single day. So if there's something that's not right or something that they see as an issue, they'll let us know. And then a lot of times out of that, we get more than just condition information. So we'll get considerations that aren't related to life cycle, but may be functional. Again, that's not necessarily at the condition assessment documentation phase. We're not trying to say, hey, you can make this more functional by doing this. But if we get that information, we definitely want to catalog that so we can have that discussion, so we can communicate that to the district leadership, so then they can start having conversations around those items. So when we get to the kind of high level stuff, every campus we went to, we had some what we call wish list items that they, the administration on that campus said, hey, if we did this, we think it would be great. So we try to capture that. It's not going to show up as a, in our assessment piece per se, unless it's a district priority, and those are conversations that we have directly with the administration team. So then after all that part's done, we actually go and physically walk all the buildings, look at the condition of what's there on site, and try to document and build this database. So on the screen below the Lovejoy logo there is the database. So it's got everything line item by line item based on the building, the location within the building. If there's multiple buildings, then it'll be one of those buildings on campus. So for instance, the high school, multiple buildings, so it'll apply to that specific building, then a line item, then a category. So as far as information, there's a lot there, but it lets us sort and filter so we can review individual items as needed. So as far as how do we prioritize and how do we determine life cycle? This chart shows industry accepted standards for useful life for many of the bigger components within a building. So again, this isn't something that we're creating. We're looking at the industry and we're saying, okay, what are you seeing for useful life before you start having issues and you really need to consider replacement? And that's what we base a lot of this on. So when we go walk, specifically like your air handlers and your big equipment, we're looking at manufacture dates on the tag to confirm, hey, this is getting close to 15 years, so that's going to change and impact how we prioritize that information. And you've got several schools now that were 2005, 2006, 2007, so you're getting into that 15 to 20 year window on some of those buildings. So those are considerations going forward, just from a maintenance standpoint. Things like carpet and finishes, and we assess those as well, but there's really not an industry standard per se, because it really depends on where. If it's not a high traffic area, that carpet could last 20, 30 years. If it is, maybe it's 7 or 8. It just depends. So that's really just a case by case, looking at it and seeing if there's deficiencies with the installation. So the next several slides are just going to be some overviews of campuses. We're going to start district-wide, and we call these strengths, needs, and concerns. So there's some opportunities. There's some strengths that we saw within the district, and we just want to communicate that to you all as well. So I think you guys do a really good job with safety and security, secure vestibules and window films and all those. We noticed that was consistent throughout the whole district. So I think that's great. And I will say too, I don't know if it's specifically on here, but in general, your buildings really are in good shape. You're getting into the phase, like I said, you've got some older buildings. They really, it's kind of hard because it doesn't seem old. For me, 30 years ago doesn't seem like what 30 years is now. But so you're getting into that window. Like I said, there's some areas where just some considerations going forward, you want to start planning for replacement on some of those critical components. But some opportunities here. So wayfinding signage we noticed really wasn't consistent across the campus or across the district. So maybe that's an opportunity for a consistent branding and messaging. And that way, parents see the same thing coming and going from campuses, along with marquee signs as well. An opportunity to provide digital marquees just for communication piece. Again, not critical to the function of the school, but these were some opportunities that we saw. And then one consistent thing that came up was adding changing tables within special education restrooms. They don't exist currently, so we couldn't grade them per se, but something we wanted to capture because it came up multiple times. And then one of the concerns I think that was communicated as well is there's some campuses that are on septic systems. Maybe there's not much you can do about that, but I know that does take up space on the site that you could use for other things. And then it is more of a maintenance issue. So with that, we'll move on. Lovejoy High School. So strengths and opportunities. We noticed just some potential opportunities to increase traffic control measures. Just high school kids are high school kids. So anything you can do to maybe slow them down and force them to be a little more cautious is a good thing. But all that to say, when we were there, we didn't see any issues, but these were, again, comments that we received from the campus. Upgrade parking lot lighting to energy efficient LEDs. You'll see that multiple times on here. It's just an opportunity as you go forward, and something that we're working on. Our MEP group does have a kind of a payback time schedule on what that looks like as far as energy savings. When does that pay for itself? So we're going to get that information. That way we have that, and I think that's a good tool to have as far as making a decision if you want to address something like that. You do have some exhaust fans and rooftop units that are getting at the end of that life cycle. So consider replacement there. Some kitchen equipment as well in that same range, that just some functionality starting to not be as good as it was. There was noted some just some water issues in some of the locker rooms with it not staying in the shower. So there's an opportunity to address that. And then a new AV sound system in the auditorium in the high school. So again, in the scheme of things, really the big ticket things are the rooftop units, maybe some of the kitchen equipment, but a lot of these other things are fairly small because in general, the facilities were in really good shape. Leopard Stadium, this is relatively new, so there really wasn't anything here other than maybe you could consider adding some bird netting to the video deck, which is a pretty small thing in the scheme of things, but it's really all we had. So that's good. Willow Springs Middle School, again, in good shape, not a really old building, so not a whole lot here. There were a few things that our sports group noticed. The tennis courts, there's the backboard could be replaced, but relatively small item as well. The CO monitoring systems, so that's a new code related item. If you do a new installation of a gas-fired water heater, you would put a CO monitoring system in that closet where it's at, just in case there's an issue with the combustion. It's not required, but it's also not a lot of money, so it may be something to consider going forward just for safety, added safety. So the next couple things were staff related. So they did comment on the weight room not being large enough and that students were using space in the hallway. Again, condition wise, it was fine. There were no issues with the condition of it, but it was, we try to capture these things because I think these are conversation pieces going forward. And then the STEM robotics lab, there was a door connecting it to another classroom, and it was fairly cramped when we looked at it. So maybe an opportunity there as well. Sloan Creek, this one's a little bit older, but at the same time not in bad shape. But I think more of the issues that were noted again from administration were that it was designed for a junior high and it's an intermediate school. So there's some program spaces that really aren't utilized the way that they would be in a junior high. So maybe some opportunities to reconfigure some of those spaces for a little more functionality. Again, not a life cycle issue, but there are some things, a black box room that has a sound system, if you were going to replace that, it's a consideration, because if you're not going to use that as a black box going forward, maybe it makes sense not to spend the money on that. So it does help inform replacement decisions as well. Some outdoor play areas that they would like to expand, again, not a condition item, just something that was noted as well. Energy efficient LEDs on this one as well. Also, we noted lockers in hallways aren't used, so maybe there's some opportunities there. We've done some stuff in other districts where we've converted some areas, lockers, taken them out and created them into flexible learning areas within the building where it made sense. So again, not a condition item, but just maybe an opportunity if you wanted to look at something like that. Cafeteria sound system was needing repair replacement, and then hot water heaters here were getting towards the end of useful life. Natatorium, I think one of the biggest strengths here is that you have it. I know a lot of districts don't, so I think it's a great feature to have. Seems like it's used quite a bit. One of the opportunities there is the fabric, the air inflated fabric structure. Obviously, there's some maintenance needed for that, for an internal repair. And then based on conversations, maybe it's worth considering what does it look like if that's a permanent fixture, to replace that structure with a more permanent building structure that requires less maintenance. So again, that's a kind of a big picture, long-term item, something that for the district to discuss. And then along with that, just upgrading LED lights on the parking. Hart, so this is one of the little bit older buildings. The rooftop exhaust fans and DX units are getting to the end of life as well. Cafeteria sound system was needing replacement. Playgrounds are original. They seem to be in pretty good shape, but they are older playgrounds. So if there's a consideration there as far as equity between campuses, that's a conversation as well. And then modifications to the canopies just to keep birds from nesting. I know that was an issue. And there were several conversations about lack of storage within the building, as well as maybe doing something to the front entry to open it up. But again, those are not condition related items, just kind of big picture ideas. Sure.
How was the septic system there?
It seemed like everything was functioning okay. I know this one's one that it does take up quite a bit of space and it's an older system. It uses the leach fields instead of the spray head. So yeah, that's an item. Really, it's just if it's not broke, don't fix it. I know there were some conversations too about what does it look like if we can we find a way to get a force main to get to some sort of sewer on some of these campuses as well. So we're in the process of looking at those things and trying to see what the order of magnitude pricing is for that, even though it may not be a functional issue, but that was a request as far as just what does that roughly cost to get an idea. Puster, again, this building was really in good shape overall. There's a few little, there's some concrete that settled near the front entry. I think you've done some grinding in some places, but just one small consideration to replace there. Some kitchen equipment. Again, so this was, I think 2006 is when we designed this. So it's getting into that 15 to 20 year window there. So hot water heaters, kitchen equipment, and then there were just some expansion joint covers that we noticed that weren't installed throughout the building in the right place. So there's some cracking floor tile. It's not really related to structural issues. It's just that you can see the expansion joint goes up the wall and comes partially across the floor. So it just needs to be extended. So minor, but it's more cosmetic at this point. So the building that we're in now, again, this one's in good condition overall. I think the biggest challenge here, or opportunity maybe, is the way the spaces are being utilized isn't necessarily what they were designed for. So as far as strategically long-term, if that's staying here, maybe there's some consideration to reconfiguring. I know the room they're using for the nurse's office doesn't have a sink. So just simple things like that. It's not anything major, but that's a consideration going forward. And then also clear sense of entry. That was something that came up as well, as far as when parents come to drop kids off. I think if they've been here, they know, but there's no real signage out front over here that says, hey, this is where you're taking your kids. And then a few things as far as the replacement of existing RTUs and air conditioning for the IDF MDF. So admin building, again, overall it's in pretty good shape, especially as old as the building is. I think you guys have done a good job maintaining it. There's a few little things. Some of the window trim looked like it needed to be replaced. That's a really minor thing in the overall scheme of assessments. So nothing big there. And then transportation and maintenance. Your bus bar or your bus maintenance building is the oldest one there. It needs several things. I think some renovation would be good, but it maybe leads to a bigger question and conversation of, is that site utilized the best way it could be? Again, those are all just future conversations. I think there's some opportunities there to fence the whole area just to provide a little more security for the buses and wherever all the equipment's parked. HVAC units are getting to end of life there. And then, like I said, the interior of the bus maintenance building could use some renovation. So I think when you start evaluating what the costs are associated with that, maybe that's another conversation on how that looks in the future going forward. So where we're at now is we're in the process of doing line by line reviews with the district. So we have all of our data entered. We've captured everything that we've walked, and then some of these big picture items as well. So we've gone through one review, line by line, everything that's in the database, and reviewed it with the district. We're actually meeting tomorrow with Kyle to kind of bring him up to speed and go through it with him as well. So we're in that phase right now, working towards, I think, the document, the report is going to be this summer, I think in July, early July. So we're working towards that goal. That's our current status. So I appreciate the time this morning. Does anyone have any questions? Sure. Thank you.
All right. Item 13, just reporting that the board, obviously with the continuous improvement mindset, conducted a board self-assessment. And we were pleased to work through that, continue to want to find ways to be better in all aspects of board service. So with that, I'll open it for any discussion or a recommendation to accept our board self-assessment.
I thought it was a important part of the process of why we're doing this. We're trying to keep making things better in the district, and part of that is getting better as a board. So look forward to continuing to do this. And with that, I would move to approve the self-assessment that we conducted.
Second, Jeff, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. And with that, we will be adjourned.